started because there's quite a lot we wanted to. Oh, my name is Joel Brown. I am the president of the Disciples of Christ Historical Society, and I am a member of Bethany Memorial Church in Bethany, West Virginia, which was the church of Thomas and Alexander Campbell. But I want to thank all of you for joining us today. One of the things that I love about my job as president of the Historical Society is that I'm often invited to come and preach or speak at anniversary celebrations, and it is such a joy to hear the stories of the different congregations in our disciples' world. But one of the things that I've realized in my work with the Historical Society is that there's really only so much that we can do. What we really need is a collective effort, collective storytelling, which enriches the networks of local and congregational historians. I would love for you to think with me for just a moment. How many of you remember, and maybe this is still the case in your church, having somebody in your church who is designated as the church historian? Yeah? It's something that I think was so great and a tradition that I would love to see revived. Often this was a role that was a beloved elder or a church mother. And it's something that we seek at the Historical Society to cultivate, to revive. Our hope is that this workshop, and we'll have some others like it, will help raise up a new generation of people who are telling the story of our churches, of our faith communities, who can be partners with us at the Historical Society in capturing and sharing the fuller story of our churches. It's important to recognize why this matters. It's really difficult, and I think perhaps even foolish, to try to tell a singular history of the disciples. In trying to construct a singular narrative, historians are forced to choose what to include and what to leave out. And when uncritically done, the stories told often reflect only the perspectives of those who are privileged enough to be trained to tell them, often historically privileged, white and male. The truth is that our church history has always been far richer and more diverse than our historical narratives have suggested. Our aim should always be to tell the diverse histories, note the plural, that exist within the unity of our tradition. This is why congregational histories are so valuable, because they offer us the stories, experiences, and testimony of communities of disciples in specific contexts over time. We need those local histories to tell the collective story of disciples, even and especially when they complicate narratives we've told about ourselves in the past. Michael Kinnaman helpfully notes that while disciples are often referred to as a people of the parenthesis, Christian church, disciples of Christ, in parentheses, at our best, we are people of the paradox, actually, holding together seemingly contradictory ideas and beliefs, and I would add historical experiences and memories. This should be reflected in the historical narratives we tell, being willing to embrace complexity, the multiplicity of narratives, even when it gets messy. In this workshop, we have a stellar panel of human beings who will offer some ideas and tools for collecting, researching, and telling the histories of your congregations. The work of congregational historians is not just about collecting and documenting, it is about storytelling. We are inviting you to be the church's storytellers. This is core to our work at the Historical Society, where our mission is to preserve and to share the story of our church. Storytelling for us is not merely documentary work. It is a sacred, even sacramental practice. The stories we preserve and tell weave together human and divine, bearing witness to the presence and movement of God in the individual and collective lives of disciples. The stories we tell, therefore, are willing to dwell within paradox, embracing ambiguity and contradiction, holding our unity and diversity together in tension. It is guided in this sense by a spirit of reconciliation, enabling us to embrace contradictions rather than try to resolve them all the time, to inhabit paradoxes rather than flee from them. So some of that is what we're going to try to do here this morning. But before we get too far, I want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Colleen McFarland Rademacher. You want to work? I guess we already introduced ourselves in those ways. Who again is the senior archivist at the Historical Society. She brings over 20 years of archival leadership experience, including lead archivist roles at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Mennonite Church USA. She is also my partner at the Historical Society in helping us manage and organize our collections, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about our new online catalog, Spencer, and she is really the genius behind our new online catalog. Tim Lee teaches Christian history at Bright Divinity School, specializing in Asian and Asian American Christianity. His extensive research on Korean Christianity has been widely published, and Tim also serves as general editor of the Historical Society's Journal of Discipliana, and is an ordained disciples minister, having served previously as moderator of NAPAD. And Katie Hayes is the founding pastor and lead evangelist of Galileo Church in the DFW area in Texas. After nearly 2 decades of traditional church ministry, Katie decided to try something different, a vision that gave birth to Galileo Church, which I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more about. Katie has authored several books inspired by her work with Galileo, including Spiritual Refugees, the book that we have here for you all, The Early History of a New Church Plant. As I mentioned, my name is Joel Brown, and I have the privilege of being the historian and president for the Historical Society. All you really need to know about me is that my spouse is the pastor at Bethany Memorial Church, and I'm the father of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, 2 daughters, Margot and Evelyn. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim Lee.
Thanks, Joel. Good morning. It's wonderful to see everybody. I think I have 10 minutes. I'll try to do it as fast as I can to get stuff through, but it's really wonderful to see you and to engage in conversation about topics that I really enjoy thinking about and sharing about, and I hope to get some insights from you today about writing history in general and the congregational histories in particular. So this is, as Joel mentioned, designed as a practical workshop to help you get started on actually writing your congregational histories. But I'd like to preface it just a little bit with some general or philosophical perspective to put us in a proper philosophical context. I don't think I need to tell you that disciple is a church. Disciples are a church born in defiance of tradition, right? On the frontiers for what was coming into being as a new country, and what was there, the pioneers of our tradition. I realize these are now terms that are being problematized, frontier, pioneers, but these are the sort of things we need to, struggle through. We're at the phase where these are still taken for granted terminology, so I'm not going to quibble too much at this point. So, and that's because they were under a particular theology about where world was for them and where world was heading. And again, you know this story well. They believed that the end of the world was not far off, and that they had a part in bringing that prospect into realization by living a holy life as they envisioned it. And to do that, they didn't think they need tradition, all these histories, establishments, institutions. They thought they just needed to go straight to the Bible, restore the early church as it is presented in the Bible. So they labored, Alexander Campbell, Thomas Campbell, Barton Stone, Walter Scott, and many others, to realize that vision. And of course, as time went on, the eschatology that they envisioned was not going to happen anytime soon. And what they ended up doing was to establish a new tradition in of itself. And along the way, our second, third generation folks we now call restorationists or disciples, Christian churches, churches of Christ, or Stone Campbell movement, put them all together in one basket, right? We realized we really need to get our stories straight. And then, so we founded this institution called Disciples of Christ Historical Society, where we begin to collect our resources. So here we are. We are a community that did not believe in tradition, but now has embraced tradition. And we have to figure out what to do with it and how to make it work for us, how we fit into this, actually. We don't make a tradition. Tradition makes us. That's the better way to think of it. And how do we tell ourselves and others about our tradition? And history is one way of getting at it. Everything is a history. It's an unofficial motto of American Historical Association. It was coined by executive chair, executive president of the AHA, James R. Grossman. But everything has a history. You think about it, right? So time encompasses everything. When you want to understand something, history has to be there somewhere. History is not everything, but everything has history. So if you don't have history, you have not understood whatever you're trying to understand. Another thing, the second quote there is kind of hard quote. Nothing is sadder than someone who has lost his memory, and the church which has lost its memory is in the same state of senility. It was written 30 years ago by Henry Chadwick, a very distinguished church historian who taught, I think, in Cambridge. But it's a hard thing to say, right, given our current sensitivity toward Alzheimer and other kinds of illnesses. But the reality cannot be denied. No memory, horrible prospect of navigating the world. We have to have our memory, history. Third quote there, if we want to plan well for the future, we must understand our present. We can understand our present only if we understand our past. If we do not understand our past, we cannot understand our present, and we cannot plan well for the future. And that's from yours truly. Past is never dead. It's not even past. William Faulkner, famous quote. So approaches, I think I probably used that more than half my time, but There are a number of approaches, and church histories have been written in volumes. And I have a couple of examples there of central church history, written by A.T. de Groot, who used to be a church historian at Bright Divinity School. Central of Des Moines, the story of Central Christian Church disciples, published in 1945. And then in 2010, there was a book published on the history of Park Avenue Christian Church, 200 years of seeking justice, embracing diversity, inspiring imagination. So these are just a couple of examples of books that actually are about congregations. And I've been, researching to find congregational histories. To my surprise, there weren't many actually. There were a lot of histories about denominations, church movements, but not about particular congregations, which was interesting. And here's a little pamphlet about the history of a University Christian Church in Fort Worth. It was written by Colby Dixon, one of the earliest deans of TCU/Bride, and it ended in 1941, it was really never expanded on by anyone else. So we don't, UCC at Fort Worth don't really have yet a full volume history of ourselves, and I'm the one that got tapped to work on this, so I'm working on that. So what we have instead is a kind of chronology slash sort of turning point timeline. And turning points is what I want to talk a little bit more about. And turning points is a good strategy that I would recommend. It's a combination of narrative and chronology, in that it's a kind of a juiced up chronology, but you pick significant points in the history of your congregation, and you build narratives around each of those significant points, and then you build a larger narrative to encompass all that. I recommend this because this is a simple yet effective strategy for people who are starting out to do church history. And this is a very highly respected strategy used to, tell stories about history of Christianity in the entire world, for example, by Mark Knoll. And there's one on the history of Christianity in the United States, and Joel has recently written one for our denomination. So that's a strategy. Do I have any time left? Okay. So I have an illustration here of how you can use that, and I do this. I've used this to tell the story about, tell the history about the West Adams Christian Church, or Japanese Christian Church. And I've heard a couple of folks here whose life journeys intersect with this particular congregation. And this is a fascinating story most people in our denomination don't know about. West Adams closed in 2010, but during its days, it was a thriving Japanese American disciples church. Right? It starts out, beginnings, 1901. I'm not going to read all this because I don't have the time. I'll just tell you what this is about. So again, the point is to show you how this turning point approach can be applied. Beginnings, I talk about how a group of Japanese bachelors met the pastor in Los Angeles, a Broadway Christian church, who helped them form a Bible study. And that Bible study, in 1908, becomes a church congregation. And with the help of the Christian Missionary Society of Southern California, they build a building where they begin their ministry in earnest. 1914, church building. There's an entire story about that. And then in 1929, growth and challenges. They have families, and this was a very difficult period for Asian Americans during this time. All sorts of prejudices, very similar kind of experiences that African Americans and Latinos had, were had by these people. But they built church, and the church provided a center for their lives, not only for church members, but for the Japanese American community that surrounded it. And this really became one of the most successful Protestant churches for Japanese Americans in the entire world, I mean, entire country, not just in Los Angeles. Because as you know, Japanese, most of them are not Christian. Today, less than 1% of Japanese are Christian. Back then too, most of them are Buddhist, Shintoist, so forth. So when you have, like 150 or 200 member Japanese immigrants who are Christians, that was a big deal. So there were people coming from various parts of the country to learn how this phenomenon occurred. Very interesting story. And they had challenges such as second generation coming up, not fluent in Japanese. Like it's an American story experienced by every ethnic group that came into this country as immigrants and became assimilated or semi-assimilated, including Europeans, Czechs, Slavs, you have Anglos. All these people have exactly the same kind of course, except Anglos. They didn't have any problem second generation speaking English, right? But whichever immigrant whose first language was not English had the same problem, challenges. And then forced dissolution, traumatic experience of how that congregation got dissolved forcefully by the government. Delano Roosevelt, through his executive order 90066. And you all know the story. And so there's a whole lot of story there. And you can kind of summarize that into one chapter under that date, and reintegration. The Japanese American church got dissolved, and they were dispersed into these camps, internments, facilities throughout the western part of the country. And then they returned, and they wanted to go back to their church, but by that time, that institution had been taken over by the denomination and turned it into something different, the All People's Church, which was at the time innovative church for it was a multi-ethnic, multi-racial ministry, one of the first in the entire country. A very exciting ministry, but it was using the formal facilities of Japanese disciples, and they came back and they wanted their church back. There was a tension, real drama, right? How did they resolve that? That's going to take 2 sessions. I'm going to skip that. 1948. So eventually, the denomination helped them found another building, found another facility to move in. So Japanese Americans now named themselves West Adams Christian Church, simply because they were in the West Adams district of Los Angeles. But so during this time, they really revived post-war, blossoming into kind of vibrant center of Japanese Americans as well. And you have a sense of that in that third chapter As before, the church became a third section. The church became a community center for Japanese Americans in the area. Nisei and Issei first generation, Nisei second generation, flocked to the Sunday services, and the baby boom generation filled the social hall and classrooms, youth fellowships, Celestians and Cepheutians, young adult fellowship, girl clubs, Pixies and Starlets, YMCA clubs, Spartans, Grade A, and Daredevils, Junior High Y. It's just like any other sort of church you would find in the United States. That was the life of the church. And then there's challenges again. This time, Santa Monica Highway, I-10 simply was built right next to them. Again, this is a story, in of itself is significant. The way these highways were built, right? Not to provide conveniences for marginalized people. This church basically had to disintegrate because all their members had to move away because of this new freeway. And then they continued through these challenges. They continued their ministry through the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, and then finally in 2010, they completed their ministry. So you have closure there, right? It's got challenges, closure. So this is an example of how you can do turning points church history.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was really interesting, and Wes Adams is going to come up in my talk as well. I think this has presented a really interesting opportunity for our audience to learn a little bit kind of directly about congregational histories and congregational records. So thank you so much. So my name is Colleen, and as you have heard, I am the senior archivist at the Disciples of Christ Historical Society. And I think I so appreciate what Joel had to say about disciples being people of the paradox, because I think you're going to hear me talk a little bit about a paradox that is at the heart of archival work and documenting faith communities. I wanted to start, though, by backing up, and I know this is going to be a review for many of you who are experienced researchers, so bear with me if this is old information to you, but this can be very helpful, I think, to people who are new researchers. We archivists can really confuse people with our jargon and our terminology, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what is an archives and explain to you that an archives and archives are not necessarily the same thing. An archives is usually the organization that holds an archival collection, and that's sort of what they are in the business of doing. So Disciples of Christ Historical Society is an archives. Archives, though, are also the records themselves, the records created or received by individuals, families, organizations, and preserved because they have what we call enduring historic value. It's a phrase we really like. So your congregation probably has archives, but is not an archives, right? So when I talk with people, sometimes I find that this word that means so many different things can get in the way. I also wanted to spend a moment just talking about records too. How is an archives, how are archives different from libraries and books and journals, right? What's the difference? So archives are pretty interesting because we focus on information that is produced or received by a person, a family, or an organization in the course of their activities. So the kind of theory is archives are just made as people go along doing what they are doing. And I'll give some examples from congregational life in a moment. There's no There's no extra activity as there would be in sitting down to research and write a book, right? Or sitting down to publish a blog or make a video. There's sort of no extra activity is the idea. Now, there's a little wiggle room there. Joel's going to talk about oral histories, which are so important in the work of congregational histories for reasons I'll explain. But the qualities of the archival record are really three. They're unique, or pretty close to unique. I know things are either unique or not. But they're unpublished sources. They were not usually meant for public consumption, right? You think about older forms of archival records, correspondence, diaries, journals, of course some of these exist until today, meeting minutes. These were made for individuals privately communicating, or an organization discerning what to do. These were not really meant to be out in the public, and when they come into archival custody, then they go out into the public, right? That's why they're such valuable sources. We also have a category that's informally published. What the heck does that mean? That's like a church bulletin or a newsletter. You know, it's meant to be read by a small public, but certainly a church bulletin does not get an international standard serial number, things like that. It's not produced in quantities so that it can be in the Library of Congress. It's just a much smaller kind of entity. Records are organic. I know it sounds more like a grocery store than an archives, but by that what we mean is they are, as I was saying, generated in the course of your activity, right? In many cases, your archival records are not created because somebody said, I gotta make sure somebody remembers us. It's more about, oh, we have to file our annual nonprofit report. We have to balance our checkbook. We have to keep track of the decisions we made, right? We have to make decisions. So those are the kinds of activities that are generating archival collections or archives. And then they're manifested in a variety of formats, right? It's not like archives are only things on paper. Archival records can include just about anything, honestly. You can record information on it. It can be an archival record. So that would include audio tapes, videotapes, film, computer discs, right? That's a brave new world. Photographs. All of this can be considered an archival record. So I want to talk for a minute about what is usually in congregational records. And here's where you're going to hear a little bit of my paradox, or the paradox coming out. Because honestly, I guess I'm going to say this, Joel, I find congregational records usually helpful, but on some level disappointing, because they tell me an awful lot about what it's like to be a nonprofit organization in the 20th century, right? So they tend to have information about the congregation as a 501c3, bylaws, constitutions, and those are important. But after a while, it's like, it's a group of people who worship together, right? Okay, they have a treasurer. Wow, it never occurred to me that would happen. They have elders. Who'd have thought? So you're not getting a lot of revelation out of these. Board minutes and committee minutes are very helpful in terms of kind of understanding what happened, but often it's like, we decided to buy a new refrigerator for the church kitchen. Okay, great, but that's not going to make it into your congregational history, right? That's not a turning point, as Tim was saying. Annual reports, again, also really interesting, but they don't, something missing. Membership records. Very important, great genealogical source, great for locating individual people. Not so much a record about the body, the community of the church. You'll find a lot of information about financial activities, right? This is about accountability, and that's good that you're finding that information. But is that the essence of your congregation? Probably not. Information about purchasing, constructing, and stewarding property and buildings. out of that, again, that's good stewardship, that we have a lot of records around that. Does that tell us who you are as a faith community? Not really. Sometimes, and careful reading, you can suss some of these things out, but it maybe doesn't tell us as much as we want to know. Anniversary bulletins, celebration bulletins, historical sketches, these are usually pretty cool. Here's where some of the storytelling does come through. So always happy when a church wants to give us some of that material. Information created and distributed for worship and congregational life. Bulletins and newsletters, sermons sometimes make it into church archives. Oh, I have that in there twice. Whoops, it was late last night, but they're good sources, so there you go. And then photographs, and I even put down the kinds of photographs that tend to come in, right? Building exteriors, usually, sometimes you'll see like the table or the front of the church, but usually it's the exterior. Portraits of the preachers and ministers, special events, everybody standing in front of the church. Sunday school classes, or what we might now call small groups, assembled usually in front of the church, and some social activities. These are often not well labeled or identified, right? Especially if it was 1980 to 1990, 2000. Lots of photographs. Who are these people? We don't necessarily know. So these are the things that are not in congregational records. And this is where we kind of are talking about the gaps, right? What are the gaps? Information about the impact of ministries, of the congregational ministries, on individuals and communities. It's often not there. It's implied, but it's often not there. Conversion narratives and spiritual autobiographies. Now, hey, if we were all Moravians, actually, we would have spiritual autobiographies in our church archives because that is part of their faith practice. It is part of how you are a Moravian. You write a spiritual autobiography. That's not a tradition disciples have, so you won't find that in most cases. And then what I'm going to call it the soul or the spirit of the congregation, expressed in individual and shared stories of faith. Now the good news is there are places where you can get at some of this stuff. They're more likely to be found, honestly, in personal papers, organizational records of ministers, members, ministry partners, right? So it's not really in the congregation's archives, it's in other records, other archives, which is interesting. Published and unpublished congregational histories, when we get past the timeline, right? If a previous historian identified some turning points for you, that's going to be really helpful. Maybe you are seeing the turning points really differently now. Or maybe you're seeing, oh, this is an echo. This is an echo of something that happened in the past. Maybe this is part of our spiritual DNA as a community. Believe it or not, newspaper articles and scrapbooks can be really helpful because it's the newspaper articles are an outside sort of account of what this congregation is doing. And often they have to create a story so someone will read it, yes. And scrapbooks are a really neat way that congregation members sometimes document their work and they have a little story to them, like they have a narrative to them in many cases. And then oral histories, which I'm going to let Joel talk more about, but I just want to nod that this can often be an incredible source for filling the gaps. A question you may have if you're planning to write a congregational history is, does the Historical Society have records about my congregation? And I'm going to give you the archivist answer of, well, it depends, right? Did you send us anything? Did anybody from the congregation send us anything? Or did we happen to pick something up along the way? Or maybe did one of your preachers give us a set of personal papers? Maybe. So we have two main sources for congregational records. One would be our congregational reference files. These are files created by the staff of the Historical Society going back to 1941, where they kind of would find something interesting about a congregation and drop it in a file. So these are also called vertical files. They're full of gems and junk. I think that's the best way to say it. You just kind of never know what's going to be in there. Sometimes, I've opened them up and I've been amazed sometimes at what I find. And sometimes I open them up and I'm like, wow, why did I need a copy of what you sent to the yearbook in 1973? I don't need that, because it's in the yearbook, right? But if you are embarking on a project, you can see if we have a congregational file, and we can let you know what's in it. We have some congregational records, and I'm still trying to understand what the collecting policy was in the past. I don't have a good sense of how we were collecting, so I can't really tell you why some congregations sent materials in and why some didn't. Right now, we are experiencing, as you can imagine, a big influx of materials from churches that are closing or downsizing. We are very challenged by that, and this is part of what Joel was saying, is that we can't do this work alone. We cannot be the repository for every set of congregational records, and we honestly think that doesn't serve the church or the congregation or historians in the future very well. And then you can look for related personal papers and organizational records, as I've been saying. Now, again, had I not been so overwhelmed and just sort of basking in the experience of this, which is my first assembly, I would have been more clever and put up the record for West Adams Christian Church, okay? But I'm gonna ask you, so this is our new catalog, Spencer. Bear with us and watch it grow with us. Right now it has 30-some collections in it. We have a lot more collections than that, but it's gonna take us some time to put them in there. If you search just on the term Japanese, you are going to find two very different collections that relate to West Adams. One is a set of records that we think we got from the regional ministry at a time when West Adams ran into some trouble with its nonprofit status or its religious organization status, and had to gather some records to prove it was a religious organization to maintain that status. And so it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, but there's some key records in there. The other collection that we have represented in Spencer is a collection from a missionary woman. She was a kindergarten teacher at the Japanese Christian Institute from the 20s through the period Tim talked about when the church went through that very traumatic experience of being closed down, relocated, and then their church was turned into a very different kind of ministry. Those records have correspondence, so she was corresponding with folks in the congregation as they were being relocated. And so that tells you a little bit more about the community and the experience of being a congregation, particularly at that difficult time. So I would invite you after this workshop sometime, maybe when you get home, take a look at our catalog, search Japanese, should pull them both up, and look at the differences in those records. Every record here, these are not digitized records, these are descriptions of what is in this collection. And you'll see just they're very different materials, one showing more of a congregational records perspective and the other showing a personal papers perspective. Finally, I just wanted to address this. Help! I was trying to write a congregational history, and now all of a sudden I'm in charge of the archives. Yeah. This happens to people. If this happens to you, contact us through our website. There are ways to contact us. We have some resources, and we can help you get started on this. We can recommend sort of steps to take if this is what your archives looks like. Everything from simply getting an inventory going, putting things in boxes, what kind of shelving should you buy, all of those kinds of practical questions. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Joel. Thank you very much.
Hey y'all, I'm Katie. I'm not an archivist or a historian. I'm a pastor. And I've been pastoring churches for over 30 years, and as I approach this question of congregational history, I come at it with an idea that it's pastoral work and a gift that pastors and other church leaders can offer to their current congregations. In thinking about this, went back to the book of Acts to remember again Luke as a church historian who had stories to tell in what he called his carefully researched account, beginning with part 1 in the ministry of Jesus, but continuing with part 2 in the book of Acts for the sake of his reader, Theophilus, and for the sake of Theophilus' own faith development and maturity. What would it mean for his reader imagined or real, to receive the stories of the nascent church and how it was that the people who followed Jesus in the first place were now going to continue his ministry with the help and cooperation of the Holy Spirit. And I maintain that the book of Acts really, as a history of the church, is a history of two things working together. That is to say, a history of people following Jesus, that is, disciples of Christ, and a history of the Holy Spirit calling, leading, pushing, nudging, challenging, and empowering those people to do the work of Jesus in the world. And so the story of Acts is kind of a story of congruence, of times when the people of God and the Spirit of the living Christ kind of got on board with each other to make things happen. I was thinking about the story of the selection of the replacement apostle, replacing Judas in Acts chapter 1, and how the people together nominate a couple of folks who might be good for this role. And then Acts 1 says they prayed then for the leading of the Holy Spirit to figure out what to do next, and then played a little game with dice or straws or something to let the Holy Spirit show them which of those would become the new 12th disciple. I was thinking about Philip and the eunuch and how the Holy Spirit draws him to the place in Acts 8 where he's going to speak with the eunuch and then whisks him away to his next assignment after that's done. I was thinking about the Jerusalem Council when the leaders of the church met to decide whether the Gentiles, which is me and probably most of us in this room, could be in, right? And when James the elder eventually sort of announces the decision about the inclusion of the Gentiles in the work of Jesus in the world, he says, for as long as it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us. It's like, how are we, the people of God, going to get on board with what the Spirit is doing? How will we now cooperate together for what God is asking us to do and be in this world? So this is a question that we've been asking each other at Galileo Church for our whole 12 years together, is how and in what ways have we recognized that we are on board with the work of the Spirit in our life together as a church in this place? When, we have asked, have we felt most ourselves? When have we felt most in alignment with what God is calling us and gifting us to do? And, parenthetically, when in our life together have we experienced a kind of disjuncture, a sense of vertigo? When have we been clumsy and ungraceful? When have we found ourselves out of alignment with what the Holy Spirit was trying to get us to do? And in our 12 years together, we have some big stories about that. Times when it was a swing and a miss. Times when we tried things that just did not work. Stories we're embarrassed to tell now, but are so important for our learning experience, for our growth as a church, and our gradual maturation as a family of God together. So asking who we are at our best as we cooperate with the Holy Spirit tells us a couple of things. One is, it's able to tell us who altogether we have become. What kind of church are we? What are we doing here? Why are we here and not there? Why is it us and not someone else? Who would miss us if we were gone? What is our task in this world God still loves? That's been helpful for our congregation as we've developed missional priorities that tell us what we should be saying yes to and what we should be saying no to. Because there are all kinds of opportunities for our church to do great things in the world. God's got lots going on, but not all of those great things are our job to do. So asking of ourselves, when have we felt most like ourselves? When have we felt at peace and found joy and energy in our cooperation with the Holy Spirit? Which will then tell us not that this is now who we are and our identity is solidified there, but knowing who we have been and how far we've come then becomes a kind of directional vector, a particular thrust toward our future about who we are meant to become. Because as we all know, the Holy Spirit, she blows where she will, right? She takes us places we didn't imagine we would go. But if we understand where we've begun and what direction we've been traveling, even as we've made course corrections along the way, it helps us understand then where we're going. So the book that I shared with many of you in this room, this book, We Were Spiritual Refugees, it's a memoir. It's not a history, but